Good evening to our dear listeners of Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am Jane Pauley, and tonight we are gathering in this quiet space to talk about something that sits literally at our fingertips, yet we so often overlook. We often think of aging as a series of inevitable aches, but what if those small sensations were actually a sophisticated alarm system? Joining me tonight is a man who has spent over 5 decades listening to the rhythms of the human body, a renowned neurosurgeon and public health advocate who has guided more than 20,000 patients through their most vulnerable moments, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Dr. Gupta, thank you for being here with us in this warm corner of the airwaves.
It is a profound privilege to be here, Jane. You know, after 50 years in medicine, I've realized that the most important conversations don't always happen in the sterile halls of a hospital, but in quiet moments like this one. I've seen thousands of patients, and if there is one thing I've learned, it's that the human body is incredibly loyal. It tries to warn us long before a crisis occurs. I'm here today not just as a doctor, but as someone who cares deeply about our elders, hoping to translate the silent language of our nerves and vessels so that we can all lead longer, more vibrant lives together.
Doctor, I want to start with a story that stayed with me. A few months ago, a dear friend of mine, a woman who is always the life of the party, mentioned over tea that her left hand felt a bit heavy, almost like it was waking up from being asleep, but the feeling wouldn't quite go away. She laughed it off, calling it a senior moment or maybe just a bit of arthritis from gardening. But only 3 days later, we were all sitting in a hospital waiting room because she had suffered a mini stroke. It haunts me, Sanjay, because it seemed so minor at the time. Why is it that these tiny, almost polite signals in our hands are often the precursors to something as massive and devastating as a stroke or a heart attack? It feels counterintuitive that our hands would know something about our heart or our brain before we do.
Jane, that story is sadly one I have heard hundreds of times in my exam room, and it touches on a very deep biological truth that we are only now fully beginning to quantify. You see, the hands are not just tools for gripping or feeling, they are the most distal outposts of our circulatory system. Because the blood vessels in our fingertips are so incredibly small and fine, they are often the very first to show signs of struggle when the pump, the heart, or the command center, the brain, begins to experience a decline in flow. Think of it like a long irrigation system in a drought. The plants at the very end of the line will wither long before the ones near the well. In 2024, a groundbreaking study out of Japan confirmed this, showing that subtle changes in hand function and sensation can appear weeks before a major cardiovascular event. I like to call these vascular whispers. The body isn't shouting yet, it's whispering through a slight tingle, a coldness in the palm, or a lack of coordination. When your friend felt that heaviness, her body was actually conducting a complex internal dialogue, trying to tell her that the microcirculation was failing. It wasn't just a senior moment, it was a cry for help from a system that was losing its rhythm.
That phrase, vascular whispers, is so poetic yet so chilling. It makes me wonder about the thousands of people listening right now who might be feeling a slight numbness as they hold their phone or a cup of coffee and are telling themselves it's just old age. Is it truly possible that a simple change in how we hold a pen or the way our skin looks on our knuckles could be a map of our internal health? It seems like we've been taught to ignore the small things and only worry when there is pain, but you're suggesting that by the time pain arrives, we might have missed the most important window for intervention. How do we distinguish between the normal wear and tear of 70 years of life and these whispers that signify a looming storm?
That is the essential question, Jane, and it requires us to change how we view our bodies. Pain is a loud, late signal, but the whispers are subtle. For instance, I once saw a patient who noticed that his signature was changing. His hand just didn't feel as responsive as it used to. Most people would say, well, I'm 75, my hands are tired. But in reality, his heart was struggling to maintain the blood pressure necessary to perfuse those tiny vessels in his motor cortex and his extremities. We have to realize that our hands are a mirror. If the blood is thickening or the arteries are narrowing, the evidence will show up in the furthest reaches first. The Japanese research I mentioned earlier found that people with declining grip strength or persistent numbness had a significantly higher risk of a stroke within the following year. It's about the fluidity of life. When that fluidity is interrupted even by a fraction of a percent, the hands are the first to lose their grace. We shouldn't be frightened by this, we should be empowered. If we can learn to read the map of our palms, we aren't just waiting for a stroke to happen, we are actively preventing it. We are catching the whisper before it becomes a scream.
It is so true that as we get older, we start to develop a certain stoicism, a habit of brushing off small discomforts as if they are just the tax we pay for living a long life. I hear it all the time from my friends and neighbors who say that their hands feel stiff in the morning or that they have a constant pins and needles sensation, and they just shrug and say, well, Jane, everyone my age feels this way. It is just the weather or the way I slept. There is this deep-seated fear, I think, that if we acknowledge these small things, we might open a door to a reality we aren't ready to face, so we choose to stay in the dark. How do you, as a doctor who has sat across from thousands of people, navigate that delicate tension between a patient's desire to ignore the truth and the urgent need to address what their body is trying to scream through those quiet tingles?
You've touched on the heart of the geriatric struggle, Jane, and it reminds me so vividly of a woman I met in Boston, Massachusetts named Mary Collins. Mary was 72 years old, a retired school teacher with a spirit as bright as the autumn leaves, but she had been living with a persistent numbness in her left hand for nearly 3 weeks before she finally sat in my office. She told me with a nervous little laugh that she was sure it was just her old arthritis flaring up again because she had been knitting sweaters for her grandchildren and she didn't want to make a fuss over something so trivial. But as I listened to her, I saw the hidden anxiety in her eyes, the way she kept rubbing her left thumb with her right hand as if trying to wake it up. The tragedy of Mary's story is that she was caught in that very trap you described. She was more afraid of the diagnosis than the symptom, so she convinced herself that her cold, tingling fingers were just a part of getting old. Unfortunately, because she waited, that trivial numbness was actually the precursor to a mini stroke that occurred just days after her daughter finally forced her to see me. It broke my heart because Mary represents millions of people who believe that suffering in silence is a sign of strength, when in fact it is often a missed opportunity for a cure. We have this cultural narrative that aging equals decay, and so we stop questioning why our bodies feel different, but I tell my patients that aging should be about refinement, not just endurance. Mary eventually recovered, but the fear she lived with in those weeks of silence was a heavy burden that she didn't have to carry alone, if only she had trusted that her hand was telling a story worth hearing.
It sounds like Mary was dealing with a very common psychological wall, where the fear of becoming a patient or losing one's independence outweighs the physical signal of danger. When you see someone like Mary, who is clearly trying to minimize their own suffering to avoid worrying their family, how do you begin to break through that shell of denial without causing even more panic? It seems like a very fine line to walk, especially when you know that every hour they spend pretending everything is fine is an hour where the risk of a permanent crisis like a stroke is quietly climbing in the background.
It is perhaps the most difficult part of my job, Jane, because I have to be a detective of the soul as much as a surgeon of the brain. With Mary, I didn't start by talking about strokes or brain scans. I started by talking about her knitting and how much she loved the precision of her craft. I asked her when she first noticed that she couldn't feel the tension of the yarn, and that was when the wall began to crumble. She admitted that she had dropped her needles several times and had been hiding it from her daughter because she didn't want to be seen as failing. This is the hidden conflict of the elderly. The desire to protect their loved ones from worry actually puts them in the greatest danger. We talked about how the numbness wasn't a sign of her failing as a person, but rather a mechanical issue with the blood flow, much like a kink in a garden hose. By reframing the symptom as a signal to be solved rather than a judgment on her age, she was able to let go of the shame. We must realize that the silence of our elders is often a cloak for their deepest fears of being a burden. If we can encourage our parents and friends to speak up about that silly tingling in their fingers, we aren't just being nosy, we are giving them permission to stay independent. Mary's experience in Boston taught me that the most powerful tool in medicine isn't always the scalpel. Sometimes it's just the courage to ask a patient what they are truly afraid of when their hand goes cold.
We often think of our circulatory system as this big, robust highway, but you've mentioned that the hands are actually these incredibly delicate endpoints, almost like the tiniest tributaries of a vast river. I think many of us assume that if our heart is beating and we aren't feeling chest pain, then our circulation must be perfectly fine. But you're suggesting that the skin color of our palms or the temperature of our fingertips is a much more sensitive barometer of what's happening deep inside. Why is it that the heart chooses to starve the hands first when things start to go wrong? And what is the science behind these subtle color changes that we so often dismiss as just being chilled?
You have to imagine the body as a very efficient but sometimes cold-hearted CEO during a financial crisis. When the heart perceives that the total volume of blood flow is decreasing or that the vessels are becoming clogged with plaque, it has to make a survival decision. It prioritizes the board of directors, the brain, the lungs, and the heart itself, and it starts to cut the budget for the branch offices, which are your hands and feet. This isn't just a theory. A major study from Harvard involving thousands of participants showed that nearly 40% of patients who eventually developed significant heart disease had reported unusual sensations or visible changes in their hands years earlier. When the blood flow to the hands is restricted, the skin doesn't just stay the same. It begins to tell a visual story. It might turn a pale, waxy white or even a dusky blue, which is a sign that the oxygen is being depleted before it can even reach the surface. I remember a patient who told me his hands looked like marble every time he stepped into a grocery store's refrigerated section. He thought it was just a sensitivity to cold, but in reality his peripheral vessels were so constricted and brittle that they couldn't respond to the temperature change. This is the silent language of circulation. If your palms are losing that healthy, rosy glow and turning into a dull, yellowish gray, your body is telling you that the highway is narrowed. It's not just a cosmetic issue, it's a warning that the pump is struggling to push life to the very edges of your existence.
It's fascinating and a bit frightening to realize that our skin is actually a transparent window into our internal plumbing. I think about the many times I've seen people with very pale or even slightly purple fingernails, and we always just assume they need a sweater. But if 40% of heart patients had these signs early on, it means we are walking around with the answers written on our bodies. Is there a specific pattern of color or temperature that should make someone stop what they are doing and call a doctor immediately, rather than just reaching for a pair of gloves?
Yes, Jane, and it's something I wish every person over 60 knew by heart. If you notice a patchy discoloration where some fingers are white and others are red, or if you see a sudden blanching where the skin stays white for more than a few seconds after you press on it, that is a sign of vascular sluggishness. In my years of practice, I've seen that the most dangerous sign is when the hands are cold even in a warm room. This suggests that the thermostat of your circulatory system is broken because the vessels are too stiff to dilate. We often talk about thick blood or slow blood in a metaphorical way, but physiologically, when you are dehydrated or when your arteries are narrowing, the blood literally becomes more viscous. It's like trying to move molasses through a straw. The hands, being the furthest away, feel that resistance first. I once had a colleague who noticed that her own cuticles were becoming dark and brittle, which led her to discover a significant blockage in her carotid artery. She saved her own life because she knew that the health of her fingernails was tied directly to the health of her brain. We must stop viewing the body as a collection of separate parts and start seeing it as one continuous flow. If the flow is blocked at the fingertips, you can be certain it is being restricted elsewhere. It's about recognizing that the chill in your bones might actually be a cry from your heart.
It seems like such a natural part of growing older to notice that we aren't as strong as we used to be. We struggle to open a jar of pickles, or we find that our handwriting isn't as steady, and we just sigh and accept it as the fading of our sunset years. We tell ourselves it's just our muscles getting tired or our joints getting stiff. But you've mentioned that this loss of grip strength or this tendency to drop things is often misdiagnosed by the patients themselves. They think they need more exercise, but you're saying the problem might be much more systemic and dangerous than just getting old. What are the most common mistakes you see people making when they first notice their hands are losing their power?
The biggest mistake, Jane, is the assumption that weakness is purely a muscular issue. I think of Robert Jenkins, a 68-year-old man from Columbus, Ohio. Robert was a retired carpenter, a man who had worked with his hands his entire life. So when he started dropping his coffee mug or found that he couldn't quite grip his screwdriver with the same authority, he just assumed it was the wear and tear of decades of manual labor. He started doing more hand grip exercises, thinking he just needed to tough it out and rebuild his strength. But what Robert didn't realize was that his weakness wasn't coming from his forearms, it was coming from a significant narrowing in his carotid arteries. His brain wasn't sending a strong enough signal to his hands because it wasn't getting enough oxygenated blood itself. This is a trap that thousands of people fall into. They try to treat the symptom with exercise or over-the-counter creams, while the source of the problem, the vascular system, is quietly suffocating. Robert's story is a warning because he spent months trying to fix his grip while his risk of a major stroke was skyrocketing. When we finally ran the scans, we found that his blood flow to the brain was restricted by nearly 70%. The weakness in his hand was the only way his body could tell him that his brain was starving. Another mistake is neglecting simple hydration. I've seen so many seniors who don't drink enough water because they don't want to make frequent trips to the bathroom, but this makes their blood sticky and harder to pump, which immediately shows up as weakness and fatigue in the hands.
It's so sobering to think that someone like Robert, who spent his life being strong, could be led astray by his own resilience. We are taught to work through the pain and keep moving, but in this case, his determination was actually masking a medical emergency. Besides ignoring the signs or trying to exercise through them, are there other daily habits, things we do every day without thinking, that are secretly damaging our circulation and making our hands age faster than they should?
Absolutely, Jane. One of the most silent killers of hand circulation is something as simple as shallow breathing. Many people, as they age or become stressed, stop breathing deeply from their diaphragm and start taking shallow chest breaths. This reduces the oxygen saturation in the blood, and since the hands are at the end of the line, they are the first to feel that oxygen debt. I also see a lot of people who stay too sedentary, keeping their arms in a fixed position for hours while watching television or reading. This stagnation allows the blood to pool and the vessels to lose their elasticity. I told Robert that his hands weren't just tools, they were sensors. If they are failing, it means the environment they are working in, his entire body, is out of balance. We also have to talk about the cold hand habit. Many people just put on gloves or turn up the heat, but they don't ask why their hands are cold. If you are constantly cold while others are comfortable, your metabolic rate and your circulation are trying to tell you something. We need to stop compensating for our symptoms and start investigating them. Robert eventually had a procedure to clear his arteries, and his grip strength returned almost instantly. It wasn't that his muscles were weak, it was that they had finally been given the fuel they needed to work. We have to stop blaming the passage of time for things that are actually the result of neglected health.
There is so much power in the idea that our hands can be our early warning system, but I want to shift the focus to a more hopeful note. We've talked a lot about the dangers, but I know there is a beautiful side to this science as well. The idea that by paying attention to our hands, we can actually intercept a crisis and change the course of our lives. You've seen cases where a simple observation led to a total transformation in a person's health. It's almost as if the hand is offering us a second chance if we are brave enough to take it. Can you share how the science of grip strength and hand awareness is being used not just to predict death, but to prolong a vibrant, healthy life?
You're absolutely right, Jane. The data is incredibly inspiring. In the United Kingdom, researchers have been using grip strength as a primary vital sign, almost as important as blood pressure or heart rate. They found that for every 5-kilogram decrease in grip strength, the risk of cardiovascular death increases by 17%. But the flip side is what's truly exciting. By monitoring this and taking action, people are literally saving themselves. I've seen patients who were on the verge of a major breakdown, but because they noticed they couldn't squeeze a ball or open a door as easily, they changed their diet, started walking, and focused on vascular health. They didn't just not die, they became more energetic than they had been in a decade. I recall a man who noticed his hands were always falling asleep at night. Instead of ignoring it, he used it as a catalyst to overhaul his lifestyle. He realized that his sedentary habits were choking his extremities. He started a simple routine of hand stretches and increased his intake of healthy fats like omega-3s to smooth out his blood flow. Within months, not only did the numbness vanish, but his mental clarity improved significantly because the same blood that was finally reaching his fingertips was also washing over his brain. This is the hope in the science. Our bodies are not trying to fail us, they are trying to guide us back to health.
It's like a conversation between the body and the mind. If we listen to the whisper in our palm, we can avoid the shout of the heart attack. I love the idea that something as simple as a hand squeeze can be a litmus test for how we are doing overall. It feels so accessible, something anyone can do at home without a fancy machine. But for the people listening who feel like maybe it's too late for them or that they've ignored the signs for too long, what would you say to encourage them that their body is still capable of healing?
It is never ever too late, Jane. The human body has an incredible capacity for angiogenesis, the ability to create new healthy pathways for blood flow if we give it the right conditions. I have seen 80-year-olds who regained their hand warmth and strength simply by improving their hydration and doing light, consistent movement. The magic is in the consistency. When you move your fingers, when you massage your palms, you are sending a signal to your nervous system that this area is alive and needs resources. It's like tending a garden that has been neglected. At first, the soil is dry and the plants are drooping, but with a little water and care, the life returns. I want people to look at their hands today, not with fear, but with gratitude. Every time you feel a pulse in your wrist, that is your heart saying, I am still trying. If we can meet that effort with our own, by choosing better foods, by breathing deeper, by staying curious about our symptoms, we can turn the tide. I've seen miracles that were really just the result of a patient finally deciding to listen to their body's whispers. The hand that you hold your grandchild with is the same hand that can tell you how to live long enough to see them grow up. That is the ultimate second chance.
We've talked about numbness and weakness, but there are some signs that are even more peculiar, almost strange, if you aren't looking for them. I've heard of people who notice that one hand is significantly colder than the other, or that the texture of the skin on their fingers seems to change almost overnight. It's so easy to think, oh, I must have just sat on my arm, or I used too much soap. But when these signs become persistent, they are no longer accidents. They are evidence. How do we educate ourselves to see these bizarre signs for what they really are, a disruption in the symmetry of our life force?
Symmetry is the key word there, Jane. The body loves balance. When that balance is lost, it is a major red flag. I think of a patient named Evelyn Parker, an 81-year-old woman living in San Diego, California. Evelyn was a very sharp, active woman, but she noticed something very odd. Her right hand was always toasty warm, while her left hand felt like it had been dipped in ice water, even when she was sitting in the California sun. She also noticed that the skin on her left hand was becoming shiny and tight, while her right hand looked normal for her age. She didn't have pain, so she thought it was just a strange quirk of her circulation that she had to accept as she got older. But when she finally mentioned it during a routine checkup, we realized that the temperature difference was nearly 4 degrees. That quirk was actually a sign of a transient ischemic attack, or a TIA, a warning shot that her brain was struggling with asymmetrical blood flow. Evelyn's story is crucial because it highlights that we shouldn't just look for general problems, but for differences between our two sides. If one hand is pale and the other is pink, or if one hand is clumsy while the other is steady, your vascular system is unbalanced. This asymmetry is often a direct reflection of blockages in the major arteries leading to the brain or the limbs.
It's so striking to think of Evelyn sitting in the sun with one hand freezing. It sounds like a scene from a mystery novel, but it was her real life. Many seniors feel that at 80 or 85, they should just expect things to go wrong and not bother the doctor with these strange observations. They feel like they are supposed to be falling apart. How do you respond to that sense of resignation? How do you convince someone like Evelyn that she deserves to have 2 warm hands, regardless of her age?
I tell them that aging is not a disease, Jane. It is a stage of life, and in this stage, your body needs you to be more attuned, not more resigned. I told Evelyn that her cold hand wasn't a requirement of being 81. It was a request for help. When we investigated, we found that she had a significant narrowing in one of her subclavian arteries, which was stealing blood from her arm to try to supply her brain. By treating that, we not only warmed her hand, but we likely prevented a major stroke that would have taken away her independence. We have to break the myth that deterioration is inevitable. Yes, our vessels become less flexible, and yes, our nerves may slow down, but asymmetry and persistent coldness are never normal. They are gifts of time, early warnings that give us a chance to act before the damage is permanent. I want everyone listening to do a simple test. Touch your two hands together. Are they the same temperature? Do they look the same color? If not, don't be afraid. Be curious. That curiosity is what saved Evelyn's life and kept her active in San Diego. Your body is always communicating. Your only job is to stay in the conversation.
We all try so hard to do the right thing as we age. We read the health magazines, we try to eat light, and we follow the advice we've heard for years. But I've noticed a recurring theme in your work, Sanjay, the idea that some of these healthy habits might actually be working against us, especially when it comes to the viscosity of our blood and the health of our microvessels. We think we are being virtuous, but we might be inadvertently thickening the very fluid that needs to flow to our fingertips. What are some of those healthy traps that people over 60 are falling into, and how is it affecting their vascular whispers?
This is a very subtle and important point, Jane. One of the biggest traps is the way we approach hydration and light eating. I see many seniors who eat a very dry, processed healthy diet, lots of crackers, dry toast, and perhaps not enough wet foods or healthy fats. They think they are avoiding grease, but they are actually starving their blood vessels of the lubricants they need, like omega-3 fatty acids. But the most common mistake is the fear of the bathroom. I've had so many patients tell me they stop drinking water after 2 p.m. so they don't have to get up at night. By the time they wake up the next morning, their blood is as thick as sludge. Their hands feel stiff and numb, not because of arthritis, but because their blood is literally too dehydrated to reach the tiny capillaries in their fingers. It's a perfect storm for a morning stroke. We also see people who over-rely on caffeine for energy, which is a vasoconstrictor. It makes those tiny vessels in your hands even smaller. So they drink coffee to feel awake, but they are actually closing the doors on their circulation. It's a paradox. The very things we do to keep going can sometimes be the things that slow us down at a cellular level.
It's so ironic that in our effort to be healthy and convenient, we are making our blood sticky and our vessels tight. I think about the millions of people who start their day with a big cup of coffee and a piece of dry toast, thinking they are doing great while their hands are quietly suffering. If we wanted to reverse this, to make our blood silky and our vessels open, what are the simple everyday shifts that would make the biggest difference for someone who is feeling that morning stiffness or that sluggish circulation?
It starts with liquid life, Jane. I tell my patients to eat their water as much as they drink it, incorporating more soups, stews, and hydrating fruits. We also need to embrace good fats. Your blood vessels are lined with a delicate layer called the endothelium, and it needs those omega-3s to stay slippery and flexible. If you are avoiding all fats, your vessels become brittle, like an old rubber band. Another simple change is conscious movement before that first cup of coffee. Instead of reaching for the caffeine to wake up your brain, try waking up your hands. Rub them together until they are warm, stretch each finger, and drink a full glass of room temperature water first. This primes the pump and thins the blood naturally. I've seen people's hand temperature rise by several degrees just from these small changes. We have to stop thinking of our health as a series of restrictions and start thinking of it as nourishment. Your blood isn't just a fluid, it's a transport system for your vitality. If you keep the river full and the banks flexible, the whispers from your hands will turn from warnings into songs of health. It's about being kind to your circulation rather than just disciplining it.
It's so empowering to realize that we don't always need a pharmacy to help our hearts. Sometimes we just need a better relationship with our own extremities. I love the idea of nourishing our circulation. We've talked about the what and the why, but I want to get into the how. For someone who is sitting at home right now, perhaps feeling a bit of that familiar heaviness in their palms, What are the actual rituals they can start tonight? Not just exercises, but ways of living that make the hands and by extension the heart feel seen and supported?
I always think of Thomas Reed, a 75-year-old man from Portland, Oregon. Thomas was starting to see a very concerning dusky color in his fingernails, and his hands often felt heavy, like he was wearing lead gloves. He was terrified that he was on his way out, as he put it. But we didn't start with heavy medication. We started with hand rituals. I told him to treat his hands like secondary hearts. Every morning and evening, he began using a warm compress on his wrists where the major arteries are close to the skin to invite the blood to flow. He started a habit of finger walking, which is just a simple way of keeping the joints and vessels active while he watched the news. But the most important change was what I call vascular breathing, taking 10 deep, slow breaths every hour to force oxygen into the furthest reaches of his body. Thomas was amazed at how quickly his color returned. His lead gloves vanished, and his nails became a healthy pink again. His story is a testament to the power of small, consistent acts. He didn't have to run a marathon. He just had to talk to his hands every day through movement and warmth.
Secondary hearts. What a beautiful way to think of our hands. It takes the pressure off the main heart and makes us feel like we have some control over the flow of our own life. Thomas's success in Portland is so encouraging because it shows that even when the color is changing and the weight is heavy, the river can be cleared. Beyond the warm compresses and the breathing, are there mental habits, ways of thinking about our age, that actually help our blood flow more freely? It seems like stress and feeling old might literally be constricting us.
You're absolutely right, Jane. Tension is the enemy of circulation. When we are anxious about our health, our body enters a fight or flight mode, which causes peripheral vasoconstriction. It literally shuts down the blood flow to our hands to keep it in our core. So the more we worry about our cold hands, the colder they get. I taught Thomas a gratitude massage. As he rubbed lotion into his hands at night, he would mentally thank them for everything they had done that day, for holding his book, for hugging his wife, for making his dinner. This isn't just feel-good advice. It actually triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, which tells the blood vessels to relax and open. When the mind is at peace, the blood follows. We have to stop fighting our bodies and start befriending them. Thomas realized that his heavy hands were just his body's way of asking him to slow down and breathe. Once he changed his mindset from fear to care, his physiology followed. I want everyone to try this tonight. Don't just check your hands for symptoms, cherish them for their service. That shift in energy can be the most powerful blood thinner in the world.
As we come toward the end of our conversation, I want to make sure we distill everything we've learned into something solid that our listeners can carry with them. We've covered so much, from vascular whispers to secondary hearts, and the lessons from Mary, Robert, Evelyn, and Thomas. If you had to stand in front of a room full of people who are 60, 70, and 80 years old, and you could only give them 3 golden rules to protect their circulation and their brain for the rest of their lives, what would those 3 things be? How do we take this hand-brain connection and turn it into a lifelong strategy for vitality?
If I could give only 3 rules, Jane, they would be simple but profound. First, never ignore a change in symmetry. If one side of your body feels or looks different than the other, even in the smallest way, it is your body's most urgent whisper. Second, hydrate for your vessels, not just your thirst. Your blood needs fluid to reach the end of the line in your fingertips. Don't let it become sludge, just to avoid a trip to the bathroom. And third, movement is the message. When you move your hands, you are telling your brain and your heart that you are still in the game. A fascinating study from Japan showed that people who engaged in regular, purposeful hand activities, whether it's gardening, playing an instrument, or even just hand dancing, had significantly better cerebral perfusion, meaning more blood was reaching their brain. It's a virtuous cycle. Your hands help your brain, and your brain keeps your hands steady. These 3 rules aren't just medical advice. They are a philosophy of active listening. I want people to walk away from this podcast feeling like they have a toolbox at the end of their arms. You aren't just getting older, you are becoming a more refined version of yourself, and your hands are the conductors of that symphony.
The hands are the conductors of the symphony. That is an image I will never forget. It makes me want to go and stretch my fingers right now. It seems so clear now that our brain health and our heart health are not these distant, abstract things, but are literally held in our palms. You've given us a way to read our own future and, more importantly, a way to change it. Before we wrap up, is there one last secret or one last piece of research that has recently come to light that gives you even more hope for the new aging that we are all striving for?
There is, Jane. Recent research into neurovascular coupling shows that our blood vessels and our nerve cells are talking to each other in ways we never imagined. We used to think the vessels were just pipes, but they are actually intelligent. They can learn to be more resilient. When we practice the rituals we talked about, the deep breathing, the hydration, the warmth, we are training our vessels to stay young. I've seen 90-year-olds with the vascular flexibility of a 50-year-old because they stayed connected to their bodies. The secret is that the body never stops trying to repair itself. Every day is a new opportunity for your river to flow more clearly. I want everyone to remember, your vascular whispers aren't a death sentence, they are a life invitation. They are your body's way of saying, I'm still here and I need a little help to keep going. If you answer that call, there is no limit to the quality of life you can enjoy. Your hands have been with you since the day you were born. If you take care of them now, they will take care of you for all the years to come.
We began this journey with the story of a woman who almost missed the whisper before her mini stroke. And as we close, I can't help but think about how many whispers are being heard right now because of your words, Sanjay. It's a beautiful thing to realize that listening is a form of medicine. We've learned that a cold palm, a pale nail, or a weak grip aren't just inconveniences, they are the language of a body that wants to live. It's been such an honor to sit with you in this space and bridge the gap between scary medical facts and the human heart. I feel like I'm leaving this conversation with a much deeper friendship with my own body, and I hope our listeners feel the same way.
It has been a truly moving experience for me as well, Jane. You know, in all my years of surgery, the most miraculous thing I've ever seen isn't a complex procedure. It's the look on a patient's face when they realize they have the power to influence their own health. I want to thank you for creating this warm corner for us to talk. To everyone listening, please don't just hear these stories, feel them. Take a moment right now to look at your hands. They have worked for you for decades. They have held your children, wiped your tears, and built your life. Now it's your turn to look after them. Listen to their temperature, notice their color, and trust their strength. If they are whispering to you, don't be afraid. Be grateful that you have a friend inside who is watching out for you. Thank you for letting me share this part of my journey with you. It has been a joy and a privilege. Stay warm, stay hydrated, and above all, stay connected to the wonderful rhythm of your own life. Goodbye for now, and may your hands always be warm and your heart always be full.
What a perfect note to end on. Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for your wisdom and your immense kindness. And to our listeners, thank you for spending this hour with us on Healthy Kidneys After 60. We hope this episode has given you the keys to unlock a healthier, more vibrant future. If you found these vascular whispers helpful, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share this podcast with someone you love, perhaps a friend who has been complaining about cold hands or a neighbor who needs a little hope. Your support helps us continue to bring these life-saving conversations to light. Join us next time as we continue to explore the silent signals of aging and how we can all live louder and longer together. I'm Jane Pauley, and from all of us here, please take care of yourselves and listen closely. Your body has so much to tell you. Good night.